Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. My name is Pavel Fischer, and I am supposed to be your moderator, or the one who helps to deliver during this evening. We have 60 minutes, and we have 60 minutes to share with three distinguished panelists. And our role is to listen and to help them to bridge the experience, because the theme of this conference, Forum 2000 conference, is the courage to take responsibility. What does it mean to take responsibility? Is there a courage without responsibility? And maybe is there a responsibility without courage?
It is the rare.
And I think that if we speak about, or if we think about those issues, we see how complex we will have the panel. And I think that it is another reason to be grateful to have three very interesting persons with me tonight. Concerning the organization, I will ask every one of them to speak 15 minutes. We will bridge the interventions and compare the viewpoints, and then we will invite them to react among themselves. And if we have still some time, there will be a space to exchange with you, but we will see, because you will understand that the challenge is extremely interesting tonight. The first on my list is Rosa Payá. She's president of a network of Latin American Youth for Democracy. Rosa Maria, welcome here in Prague, and thank you for being with us. The second I will invite to speak Garry Kasparov, who every one of you knows, the champion and chess player Garry Kasparov, but he is here also in his quality of a human rights defender, because he chairs a Human Rights Fund, and he will speak more about his work and his experience about taking the courage to act responsibly. And my last on the list, but not the least important, is Professor Filip Zimbardo, professor from Stanford, distinguished psychologist, author of many books, and he will help us to frame the issue of leadership, of responsibility, and of the courage to take responsibility. So without further delaying, let me just introduce and welcome here on the stage Rosa Maria. Rosa Maria, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm glad and honored to be here sharing this panel with such an important company. Thank you so much. For me, taking responsibility is the way we have, especially in totalitarian regimes, to be free. It's the way we have to express our freedom. Maybe in democracy, you could know the truth and just not react to that knowledge. But in a totalitarian regimes, once you open your eyes, you do one of these two things: or you try to escape, or you try to change. Otherwise, it would be not an expression. It would be an aberration of what is to be a human being, of what is to enjoy freedom, and what is to pursue happiness in a daily basis. I came from Cuba, and my country is suffering a totalitarian regime for 58 years now, which means that the youngest person in Cuba that participate in free, plural, and democratic elections is 82 years old right now. and that reality has forced a whole population into poverty, has forced a big part of that population, almost the 20%, to escape the island and to live in the exile. And is also, well, it's also the reason why Cuban people live without the most basic human rights. But the big problem with totalitarianism is that they are never just limited to the country in which they are implemented or in which they are established. They are always toxic. And this toxicity, in the case of the Cuban regime, has been very powerful in countries like Venezuela or like Nicaragua, but have been sparsing and spreading this poison through the media and through marketing, also in the rest of the world. And we can see it in some symbols that the so-called Cuban Revolution has established in the rest of the world, even in the minds of the young people, figures as Che Guevara or figures as Fidel Castro that could be perceived, especially among the young people, as symbols of freedom, and are actually symbols of repression and totalitarianism for the Cubans and for many other citizens in the world, especially in Latin America. My remarks would be then, I suppose, 2 or 3. The first one is to raise the point of the fragility of the democracies. Recently I have had the opportunity to travel. I was prevented to travel since 2013, but recently I have had that opportunity, and democracy is very enjoyable, but it's also very fragile. It doesn't have the mechanisms that the totalitarian regime has, because they are totalitarians, because it means that they can do whatever they want, and in a democratic regime you cannot do that. But in a way, there are tools that should be implemented, especially among civil society, especially among citizenry, and the conscience that the citizenry should have of their power, that power of powerless, that Václav Havel wants to rise. And the second one is that almost the only weapon that those who live under totalitarian regimes could appeal to end the impunity of the totalitarianism and the impunity of the authoritarian regimes, which is a common factor for all authoritarians, for all totalitarians. Almost the only weapon is the voice of the international community. And the power of that voice is what could, in a measure, prevent the criminal actions of a totalitarian regime. And I'm telling you this, knowing, for instance, that the attack that ended the life of my father and my dear friend Harold Cepero 4 years ago was, of course, was perpetrated by the agents of the Cuban state security, but was an action that the Cuban government was ready to take in the moment that they perceived that the rest of the world was not going to do anything like real, with real consequence. Or they perceived that the rest of the world was not actually looking at the problem, was not actually looking at the protagonist of the fights against a totalitarian regime in Cuba. And that leads me also to my third remark, which is, even for totalitarians, even for those people living under totalitarian regime, even for them, there is a hope. And that hope is the same hope that is in democracy. That hope lives in each citizen and in the power of each citizen when they become aware of that the history, to change the history, depend on them, and depend, of course, also in that social energy that could be coordinated within several citizens. That's why, in the case of Cuba, which is a very closed system, which have a very closed constitution, a constitution that actually prevents citizens to participate in the definition of the economical, social, or political system, and actually is a prevention. There is a prevention in the constitution that says that the article that says that citizens cannot change the system cannot be changed, never, by anyone. But we in Cuba, and I think also that those that actually believe in the human being and believe that democracy, even if it's not perfect, is the best way that we have found in the last 2 centuries to live in peace and in harmony and to pursue happiness. We also believe that people is above the constitution, that the will of the people and the consent of the people is above all these rules and, of course, above totalitarian actors. That's why we are also promoting the citizen participation and the citizen involvement through concrete tools that at the end of the day could be used to a democratic transition. And the concrete tool that we are promoting is the holding of a plebiscite in the island for the Cubans to decide if they want to change to a plural and a democratic system. And that campaign that we are impulsing is called Cuba Decide, Cuba Decides, and it's also my petition to you to look on that campaign, to look on the ways that you could help the Cuban citizenry to get to that scenery in which to pursue happiness depends only on them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rosa Maria, for your message, because I think that you helped us to understand the toxicity of the regime you spoke about, the poison that can be marketed beyond the borders. And the basic choice you spoke about, escape or change, or try to change, is also a basic choice of ours who live in freedom. Fragility of democracy you developed highlights the co-responsibility of ours. And this is maybe the invitation to pay attention to the regions of the world where human beings are not respected. And the very powerful example of the crime perpetrated on your father and his friend, his fellow, is extremely concrete, because maybe there are many other crimes we should pay more attention to that different regimes prepare to perpetrate if we are not attentive enough. This hope that you shared with us is hope not only for Cuba but for the humankind, because human person is above the system. Thank you very much for this universal message I think that we can share, and Garry Kasparov from his viewpoint will certainly develop, because you have a very strong experience. Garry, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's a chilling story. So, and it resembles, my own memories, because I was born and raised in a communist country. Since you mentioned my previous occupation that made me known around the world, So I have to say that, there's a certain connection between my, original occupation and what I'm doing now, because in the Soviet Union and as in the communist world, chess was not just a game, but it was a very important tool of communist propaganda to demonstrate the intellectual superiority of the communist regime over the decadent West. Now, probably I'm the last person to complain, because I definitely benefited from the very broad network of chess clubs and schools that were built to search for talents. Again, not to promote chess as an educational tool, not to promote chess as a recreational activity, but just to find great talents to keep pushing the agenda of Soviet propaganda machine abroad. When I won my world title in 1985 at age 22, thanks to the changes that started under Gorbachev, because authorities always felt that I was kind of a rebel, that was not ready to accept all the rules imposed on us by the regime. I recognized that there was a kind of responsibility just to move forward, because if the world champion, the man who, thanks to to the publicity that I received by playing world championship matches and other events around the country, if I remain passive, that sends a wrong message. And to the contrary, if I do something, it could encourage people to join the movement. I was young, maybe too idealistic, naive, but I thought it would be a right, way to move forward. And, just to explain just a bit, my naivete, but also, this is based probably on these intentions and expectations, bright expectations that every youth has, about the future. And I recall the story that happened in 1988, where I was invited by one of our chess friends, in Paris. The restaurant was Miloš Forman. And it was, it was a time, it was 88, the end of 1988, we had a discussion about the future, and he was very skeptical, telling me, look, I saw it, I saw it everything, we saw it's the collapse of all the expectations that were raised after, Khrushchev, sort of decimated Stalin's image, then, what Soviets did in Hungary, and then what's happened in Czechoslovakia. So it's now Gorbachev, it's all going to disappear, it's not going to work, because we saw it before. And I said, no, it's going to change. He said, tell me, young man, how is it going to change? And I said, look, I have no idea how it's going to change, but trust me, one day you open, you wake up, you open your window, and they've gone. So next year, as you can guess, this is one day, my phone rang, says, Garry, this is what's happened. I opened the window, and they've gone. But of course, it was not a result of a miracle. It was a result of a great work of people like Václav Havel, Andrei Sakharov, Lech Walesa, who took responsibility, who fought against the regime, recognizing that they could sacrifice a lot. And by the way, when they fought against the regime, whether it was the Soviet Union or in the countries under Soviet control, occupation in Eastern Europe, they had very little expectations about their chances to see the change in their lifetime. But they fought because they believed, it was the right thing to do. But what helped them and what actually made this change possible? A full moral support that they received from the free world. And this is what we're missing today. That's, by the way, comes from the story we just heard a few minutes ago. There's some kind of, ambiguity, the moral equivalence. Yes, we know this is bad, but, 2 days ago, I watched an interview on CNN with Bashar al-Assad on CNN. How on earth you could sit next to the man who poisoned hundreds of thousands of his compatriots, a murderer, a butcherer, but he's given chance. It's terrifying to think, what could Dr. Goebbels do in 1944, 1945 if he had access to CNN? We have to recognize that even after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the end of the Cold War, evil hasn't disappeared. Evil could be buried, temporarily under the rubble of Berlin Wall, but eventually it sprouts out. And why? Because we lost our vigilance. Because we lost the sense what's right, what's wrong. And it was still dealing in the world with, good and evil, with, light and darkness. And ironically, we're dealing with the new rise of authoritarian, totalitarian regimes that are pretending that they have the rights to sort of privatize the moral issues. Vladimir Putin pretends that he's, he's guarding the tower of light, surrounded by the global darkness, fighting the global evil, and the only defender of Mother Russia against, all sorts of enemies. And I believe that, it's the, what is just now, it's important, is just to recognize that, without us taking this high ground, defending these values, nothing is going to happen. Because we are, politicians. They all are, full of complacency, and they want to play, they want to play softball. Always, to make sure that people are happy to hear, what makes them feel comfortable. And that reminds me another story that's happened. I think it's just, it was 2008. Václav Havel visited Moscow, and he was already quite sick. And it was a typical reception in the Czech embassy when, a famous, guest, very important man arrives. They invited some of us, members of Russian opposition. And it was a kind of a conversation at the round table. And the Czech ambassador has been basically teaching us, saying, look, we understand their problems, but Europe must engage. And it's all this nonsense about engagement, And you could see that Václav Havel was almost turning red. And at the end of this, 5 minutes lecture by ambassador of his own country to us in Russia, he got really angry, and he took a menu of the lunch menu, threw it at the table, and said, Ronald Reagan has negotiated with Soviets, issues basically of war and peace, life and death, nuclear disarmament, but he never forgot to put a list of political prisoners on the table. That's the difference between Václav Havel and others, other politicians. And now in this country we have a president who has been elected on Russian money. It's just, it's a problem, that we lost this sense of right and wrong. And we pretend that, we can negotiate with evil. We cannot. And while we still have a lot of, people who are fighting in Cuba, in Venezuela, in Iran, in Russia, but they are unfortunately denied the same kind of moral support that was received from Ronald Reagan, Maggie Thatcher, Pope John Paul II, and others. My dear friend and colleague, the bravest of our Russian opposition, Boris Nemtsov, was shot in front of Kremlin. I mean, who has any doubts about this murder? Who was behind it? Who could give direct orders? So what? It's still, it's an attempt to slow things down and to make sure that, we always have a way of engaging, negotiating. MH17, a Malaysian plane, 298 people shot by a Russian missile. So it's still, we have to find a way to soften Russian position on Ukraine. I'm not against diplomacy. I believe diplomacy is vital. We have to avoid a war at any cost. But the problem is that we are at war with the forces of darkness. And they have declared war on us. And, pretending that we can declare peace unilaterally is basically ignoring the lessons of the past. And the irony is that with all these new technologies, with all the devices that we have in our pockets or in our purses, we created a new world, a globalized world. And we believe that, this is progress. No, it's not. It's a technological progress, but this is not a social progress. It helps you to make friends, in any quarter in the world. It helps you to do business, to do financial transactions. But it also helps you to build terrorist networks. And it helps you to promote poisonous propaganda. It's ironic, but it's probably another lesson from history. Because of this technology, we created a world with no borders, which, by the way, gives no choice to dictators and thugs, but to fight us. Because 50 years ago, they could hide, on the other side of Iron Curtain and trying to sort of isolate their people from information coming from the free world. Today, information goes both ways. You cannot stop it. So that's why for them, the only way to prove that they are for real, that they care about their own people, is to fight us. They cannot compete with the free world on innovations, on productivity, on the social and cultural progress, but they are very good in competing with hatred. And they have one fundamental, advantage over us, the value of human life. For us, each loss of human life is tragic. For them, killing 1 million, it's a demonstration of strength. So recognizing that this conflict is inevitable because it's very much part of their survival strategy. When you hear Russian television, it's a 24/7 propaganda, much worse than we heard before in the Soviet Union, because unlike in the Soviet days, there's nothing about bright future. We know communists lied about it, but at least they pretended that they were building a bright future with, brotherhood, and everybody would have something, will be equal. Putin's propaganda is more like a cult of death. It's this, and this propaganda machine, it keeps perpetuating this hatred. And it has become an integrated, if not a vital part of his domestic agenda. You hear the news in Russia, you don't hear anything about Russia. 99% of the time you hear about Ukraine, America, other enemies, Syria, not about Russia, because there's nothing to be said about Russia that could make Putin look good. So making conflicts, escalating conflicts, confrontation, creating chaos, this is what they need. Whether it's Putin, Iranian mullahs, and other thugs and dictators around the world, confrontation. And we cannot stop it. Again, it's imminent because for them, it's an only atmosphere, a muddy water where they can survive. That's why Putin is so aggressive in supporting ultra-nationalist groups in Europe. That's why he's so happy to see more refugees coming to Europe, because refugees create conditions where the ultra-national forces can rise. That's why he's so aggressive in supporting Donald Trump. He could see all these elements as agents of chaos. And they want to spread chaos. They want to destroy institutions that guaranteed security and freedom for Europe and for the rest of the world since World War II. And unless we recognize that it's an ultimate confrontation and we must win it to protect our future, nothing is going to happen. Any attempt to negotiate with them is recognized by these forces as weakness. Any chance, genuine attempt to reach out for compromise, it's an invitation for further aggression. Dictators, they never ask why. They always ask why not. And they're not stopped until they're stopped. And it's responsibility of everybody. This is not waiting for a hero. Our strength is not relying on one hero, great president, or talented prime minister. It's about us. The strength of democracy is for all of us to have courage to take responsibility and to demonstrate the advantages of the free world versus non-free. Thank you.
Thank you indeed, Garry, for this extremely rich and powerful development. You spoke about empowerment of ourselves, of the power of institutions, of this willingness to escalate confrontation, and of this imperative to stop those who try to go up. The value of life, which is precious, is without any value if we go in deep in this conflict. The social progress doesn't mean that technological progress goes with, and vice versa. And if we visit, and we have to visit, some difficult countries, we have to put the list of political prisoners on the table, as you have recalled perfectly, rightly, the experience of visit of Václav Havel. I'm impressed by this development, and I will have maybe some question later on how the strategic power game can be analyzed by you as chess player. But let's leave it for later on, because I think that we have extremely powerful messengers for you, Professor Zimbardo, because this is linked with the spiritual issues, with psychology, with how a human being is constructed and how it reacts. The floor is yours, Professor, and we are delighted to have you with us.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, I had prepared a slideshow, and we cannot make it work. So I think we don't use that. I will show here for me. Okay. I want to say that democracy around the world is under a greater threat now than at any time since the 1930s and 40s, when Hitler and Mussolini and Hirohito ruled the Axis world. And it's increasing now in virtually every country, right-wing totalitarianism, and people are unaware that this is happening gradually in every single country. So many of you know Hannah Arendt, from her, a journalist, from her famous book, Eichmann in Jerusalem, where she was at his trial, and she coined the phrase, the banality of evil, meaning this man who orchestrated the deaths of millions of Jews looked ordinary, looked like your Uncle Charlie, but in his heart there was this terrible evil. But many of you don't know, she also wrote a book, The Origins of Totalitarianism. And here she said, totalitarianism starts in the minds of the people who resign themselves to being conquered. So totalitarianism is global conquest. It is the destruction of humanity. It's elimination of individual dignity. And as Garry said, it's absolute evil in action. And so the message is, it must be opposed everywhere because it is growing like tentacles of an octopus. Many of you know the research by Stanley Milgram on blind obedience to authority. And in that research, he got ordinary people to deliver electric shock to someone else, pretending he was teaching them something new. And every time they made a mistake, they increased the shock by 15 volts. It started 15 volts, 30, and so forth. And the amazing thing was, at the very end, the person that you are supposed to be helping by hurting is screaming, and the last switch is 450 volts. And the question is, could you imagine anyone going that far? 2 of every 3 Americans went all the way to the end. And so for me, when I look at that, I should mention in parentheses, Stanley Milgram was a little Jewish boy. He and I were classmates in high school. We sat next to each other. But I say all evil begins with 15 volts. Once you press the first button, you're on the slippery slope of evil. The first button, if you see the box, note 15 starts here, but at the end, you could be killing someone. So I made a modern shock box illustrating how the Nazis prepared the German population for the elimination of Jews. So 15 volts was Jews had to wear a yellow star. And then 35 volts is Jewish children couldn't go to school. And then as you go along, Jewish could own business. And then propaganda Jews are vermin. And then they could not own apartments. And then they were sent to concentration camps, and 450 volts is the final solution. So it is a gradual progression in which the people get acclimated. Things are worse, 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 and worse. And now I did the same thing with regard to totalitarian evil. Now I'm not sure I can make it work. So 15 volts is limited free speech. Control the media. Control judiciary. Politicians replace elected officials. Military and religious rule. And finally, total overthrow of democracy. So again, it is a gradual process whereby, again, as Garry Kasparov said, the people become used to it. Something is bad, you can't imagine it gets worse, and then it gets a little worse, and then a little worse. And so it's really preparing you psychologically that you can't imagine the end product, but unless you resist earlier, the end product will happen. So the abuse of democracy in America really started well, it started a long time ago, but it's illustrated in America, in Abu Ghraib prison. American soldiers were supposed to be protecting Iraqi prisoners. In fact, they were instructed to abuse them so that they would give information when they were interrogated. And when it was discovered that these soldiers had cell phones taking pictures, the American government said, oh, these are a few bad apples. I said, no, this is good apples, good soldiers put in a bad barrel by bad barrel makers, the Bush administration and the American military, who lied to say, we didn't know about this. In fact, they not only knew, they perpetuated it. So now in America, we have this man, Donald Trump, running for president of the United States with no experience in politics. It's astounding. And he says anything, and he is an example of power of the rich. Because he has always had so much money, he could do whatever he wants, say whatever he wants. And in fact, the more extreme, terrible things he says, the more he gets the front page of the media. So he is a media darling, and I think this is true in other countries, so that he's propelled to say more outrageous things against women, against Muslims, against Mexicans. And I'm sure he will not win the election, but when he loses the election, maybe only 40% of the people vote for him. That's hundreds of millions of people, and that's outrageous. And he will become a very powerful figure in America, if not a political one. I just came back from Hungary, and as you know, the Orbán government says migrants are poison, and they are not needed. So what he's doing now is he's redirecting prejudice and hate that he used to have against Roma people, against gypsies, to migrants. When I came to Budapest last year, there were hundreds of billboard signs from the airport into Budapest saying, the migrants are coming to take your jobs. There are no jobs in Hungary. No jobs for Hungarians, let alone for migrants. Migrants simply wanted to go through. And so dictators everywhere live on fear. They make people afraid of they create an enemy. So that's what Hitler did. The enemy was the Jews. Trump is saying, the Mexicans are your enemy. The agricultural system in California depends entirely on Mexican farm labor. Or the enemy now is ISIS. The enemy is Muslims. So there's always an enemy. And this is what people get afraid of. Again, as you know before, in many countries, again, and we'll see in Poland, the enemy is people of any different religion. The other thing is, last week in Hungary, the Hungarian government arranged an unusual coup with a big business. They encouraged a big business to buy the oldest daily newspaper in Hungary called Freedom of the People. And then once the company bought it, they shut it down because they said it wasn't economically feasible. And so now the government has eliminated any opposition through the media. And it was a brilliant but evil coup. I also do a lot of work in Poland, and now there's a new party in Poland, as you know, Law and Justice, which is illegal and unjust in everything they do. They just had a referendum so that women could not have an abortion under any circumstances. It didn't matter if you were raped, it didn't matter if the child was deformed. It lost barely, but everybody I know there said they will come back in a different way. So the other thing that's happening now is, in many places, religion is coming back into politics. So there it's the Catholic religion, and it's usually in villages, it's usually older people, extremely religious people living in rural areas. And the enemy is really liberals, educated people, intellectuals living in cities. So it's a new kind of challenge within countries that is, for me, alarming. So these regimes are dismantling democracy. True democracy is the counterpoint to authoritarian rule. So we must understand democracy in order to protect it. I want to recommend a book by my colleague, who's a former Iranian-American, Fateli Moghadam. It's called The Psychology of Democracy. So I just want to mention one or two more things. He says, today's threats to democracy is terrorism, allowing governments around the world to use security as a reason for restricting freedom. Erich Fromm, in 1941, wrote a wonderful book that I recommend to all of you called Escape from Freedom, trying to analyze how was Hitler so successful. And essentially what he says, which holds true today, many people don't want freedom. They say they want freedom, but true freedom means you are responsible for your action. And so when somebody says, give me your freedom, and I give you security. In many traditional marriages, that was husband say, give me your freedom, wife, I give you security. You never should give up your freedom because freedom is real, security is an illusion. Secondly, the rising threat from major and minor dictatorships, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea. The slide toward dictatorships in many countries that until recently seemed they were becoming more open. Turkey, Venezuela. And now we say Hungary, now we say Poland, and now Italy. Yesterday, the president of Slovakia said in his country he's amazed that people elected fascists. I should say in Hungary, the Orban party is not the extreme party. There's a Jobbik party, which is 20% of the national vote, which is extremely fascist. They are publicly against Jews still, publicly against migrants, publicly against their own homeless. So there you have 20% fascist. The Orban government must be 89% extreme totalitarian. Maybe there's 1% left over. So I'm almost finished. We need to explore the conditions that enable a potential dictator to spring to power, because there are always potential dictators out there. And the question is, how malleable is human political behavior? What are the mechanisms that socialize children and all of us to be willing to give in to power? What are the psychological characteristics needed to help citizens be more capable of actively participating in and sustaining a real democracy? So there's a wonderful circle that I have which says, a pro-democracy individual is somebody who says to him or herself these things. I could be wrong. I must think critically about everything, including my sacred beliefs. I must review all opinions as evidence provides. I must seek to better understand those who are different from me. I can learn from those who are different from me. I must seek information and opinion from as many sources as possible. I should be actively open to all new experiences. I should be open to creating new experiences for other people. There are principles of right and wrong always. And my quest in life is to always search for what is the right and what is the wrong, to do the right thing and oppose the wrong thing. And lastly, not all experiences are of equal value. So you have to make a judgment. So a moral judgment, moral courage is at the core of all heroism. So what I have been doing for the past 10 years is in San Francisco and now around the world, is creating something we call the Heroic Imagination Project. Heroism starts in the mind, thinking, I could make a difference. So we're not talking about military heroes or religious heroes. We're not talking about political heroes. We're talking about young people in high schools in every country in the world who are willing to stand up, speak out, and take action against injustice, against bullying, against corruption, against authority that does not deserve our respect. And when they do that, we encourage, we give them the information, we give them the tools, we give them the strategies to be a wise and effective everyday hero. And we are building programs throughout in many authoritarian nations. We have programs now in almost every high school throughout Hungary, in many schools in Poland, in Warsaw, in Wrocław, in Krakow, in Sicily, in the ghettos in Palermo, in Bali, in Geelong, Australia, in Ireland, soon in Portugal, and many places in America. So our programs really are educational. We say, but education is not to make you smart. Education in psychology is to say, I'm going to use these principles to be an effective social change agent. We want every student to say, I could make a difference. I could make my family better. I could make my school better. I could make my community better. And ultimately, when we form hero squads of all of us who think the same, I could make my nation better. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor, for this wonderful development. I think that you exhausted the issue of the banalization of evil that goes back to the origin of totalitarianism, that starts in the very heart of ordinary people, and that it is a graduate progress. This exchange, this bargaining, give me your freedom and I will give you security, is something extremely topical in the Western civilization today. You helped us to see also elements of critical thinking, how to challenge the reality today, and you showed us that heroism starts in human mind. I think that we have maybe 3-4 questions we could develop now with you, and my first goes to Rosa Maria. Rosa Maria, after following Professor Zimbardo, what should be the lessons learned you have from your father? Imagine that you are in a free country, that you can influence the program in education and schools. What should be the lesson learned or the message that you bring from this precious experience of engagement of your father?
I think that more than a sentence, it's a style. And the style should, I imagine, because of my experience with him, I suppose that a style is think what you actually think, what is your experience of life, and what thoughts that that provoke in you, and say what you think, and live in harmony with what you think, what you say, and what you do, and then we'll try to work with that. I mean, my experience is that I was born in this totalitarian regime in which my friends cannot say whatever they want because of fear, but not fear of a totalitarian regime, fear of their parents, because they were told at home, you cannot repeat at the school what you listen in your home. And they were forced to even to defend the revolution out of fear. And my experience was, you say what you think, and we'll take care about this later. And this experience is the one that make us, I mean, my brothers and I, the persons which are ready to take responsibility. So of course that I think that education should be more granted in reality, in truth, in history, and less in politics, and less in the opinion of the government ruling in that moment, but also in freedom, also in encouraging creativity and encouraging individuals to express as they are, and to live in harmony with what they are and with what their experience of their life is.
Thank you very much for this powerful word on your behalf. Garry, sometimes diplomats imagine that people who are running this world play chess and that they have trying to make a strategy, sacrifice this figure, occupy or focus this kind of strategic point in the chess game. Do you share this assessment that there is a chess game played by some, and if not, imagine that you meet Jean-Claude Juncker, the head of European Commission, and that you have 10 minutes to advise him what to do. Would you use the chess game player advices, or what should be the message that you give him, for instance, how to deal with totalitarian regimes?
I would not take this 10 minutes to advise Juncker or any other politician, because I'm not going to tell them anything they don't know. They know it already. It's this, I cannot, create political will out of nothing. So it's, and also, since I hear a lot about this, metaphors for playing chess, I have to defend the integrity of my game. I wish the free world would be playing chess, because chess is the game for democracies. It's a strategic game. It's a game with 100% transparency. This game is hated by dictators because they used to play more clandestine games. I always say dictators are not playing chess, they're playing poker. Because they can bluff, and they're very good, with the blackmail, with bluffing, raising stakes, and they can win with a weak hand. Vladimir Putin, I believe, has a weak hand, maybe a pair of 5. But he keeps winning because the free world folding cards all the time. And he knows that. And this is a problem, as following this metaphor about the votes. Nothing happens, out of blue. It's no dictatorship ever has been built overnight. It always takes time. It's step by step. And when you gradually, absolutely. And it is as we underestimate certain milestones in history. When people say, oh, how can you compare anybody to Adolf Hitler? Yes, we can and we must. Because we're not talking about Hitler from history books. We're talking about Hitler being portrayed in the free world in 1935, in 1936, in 1937. Do we want to read what London Times, New York Times, Le Monde, and other papers from the free world wrote about Adolf Hitler? Do you understand the power of the opening ceremony of Berlin Olympic Games in 1936, where the French team actually saluted Hitler and then explained it was Olympic salute, 20 degrees difference? And at this very day, when the nations marched in front of Führer, the German Legion Condor has been moved to Spain to bomb Spanish cities. This is a story. Every element of this kind of encouragement helps dictators to realize that they are, they can move further. It's what poison of impunity. You mentioned the prosecution of Jews in Germany. It's step by step. But what's happened, it's like a final stage, Kristallnacht. When did it happen? November 9. 6 weeks after free world sold Czechoslovakia to Nazis. And Hitler realized that nobody would do anything, for Jews in Germany if they gave up, the entire European nation, at his mercy. So it's important that we realize that chess is the right approach. And we should know what happens next. But one of the things I learned, by playing chess, you have to also analyze the games you played before. You have to learn from this experience. And this experience tells us that every day of delay of opposing rising dictatorship pushes the price up. And, if we don't want to see what happens, then in 1939, 1940, and 1941, we should act now. We all, it's easy to criticize Chamberlain and Daladier, but I can come up with an excuse for them. They didn't have a book to read what happens next. They didn't know. Okay, we can criticize them, but they didn't know. And they tried to work in favor of their people that didn't want conflict, that didn't want war, because the language of peace and appeasement and engagement, this language is good. Everybody wants to hear that. And the language of confrontation, the language of conflict and, God forbid, war, it's rejected by the voters. But we're reaching a point where we need, again, politicians that are willing to take the courage to tell things as it is. And one of the problems, you mentioned Donald Trump and other European populists, again, learning from chess, if you want to make a right move, you have to make a correct assessment of the position. And let's understand what is the strength of all these populists, because they wipe out political correctness. They are addressing problems that do exist. Donald Trump talks about problems that do exist in America, as many populists here. And why they're successful, at least partially, by reaching a certain point of their popularity, because politicians, mainstream politicians, they pretend these problems do not exist. And that's why I would rather spend 10 minutes talking to people here than wasting my time talking to politicians in the European Union.
Thank you very much for this extremely sharp recommendation. Professor Zimbardo, we spoke about transmission of fear. Is there also a transmission of hope which is possible? Because I think that here we have to break this fear-based societies. And how would you recommend to act if it is possible?
See, I think we have to recognize the role of the media in promoting fear, then and now. In America, we say the leading story on television is the one, if it bleeds, it leads. So media, and we know from psychology that when you present things that are fearful, anxious, the brain is geared to notice. So all media start on the first page is all the evil. The good news is on page 37. In television reporting, it's at the end, some little story about somebody helping someone else. So that's always going to be the same, because media is there to make money by getting people to watch. That's why I'm saying I think our hope has to be in new kinds of education. Our hope has to be the next generation of children who in the past grew up under Nazi education, under communist education, put a straitjacket on their thinking. So we really have to know, we as parents, we as civilians, we have to know better what our teachers are teaching in school. And in many cases, they are teaching children to think in a very, not political way, but regimented way. They are not treating creativity. They are not teaching the psychology of individual difference. They are not teaching how to transform good intentions into good action. They're not teaching critical thinking skills. So for example, I want to do something and I have a good intention. What blocks me from doing a good deed? Well, there are challenges, there are barriers. Sometimes it's within me, sometimes it's in the social situation, sometimes it's in the system. So our schools have to teach children critical thinking skills to say, when you want to do something, you have to stop, press the pause button, and say, what are the barriers to doing that? And how can I convert a barrier into a challenge, and a challenge into a solution? And again, most schools are designed to promote individual competition, every student against every other. I just came back from China, and in the Chinese school system, parents are obsessed that their child is number one, competing with millions of other children at the same level. To be good enough is not good enough. So I go and I say, no, it's important to collaborate, to form teams. We call hero squads. You always are more effective in a hero squad, 2, 3, 4. Parents say, so the problem is the system. Parents say, no, we want our child to think of him or herself as number one, because ultimately we want them to graduate and go to Harvard or Stanford.
Thank you very much for this remark. I think that creating creating a system that enhances collective action and cooperation and solidarity is one of the major challenges of current society, based on individual freedom and of individual affirmation. We have last 5 minutes, and I would like to invite you three to react maybe to points you have heard during the panel, and if we have still time left, I will give the floor to the audience. Who would like to be the first? Garry, Rosa Maria, Professor.
I guess, given that this is Václav Havel's Forum 2000, I must say with all due honor, in 2005, I received the great honor of winning his humanitarian award and spending several days with him. Most amazing, magical man. But always remember what he always said: it's truth wedded to love. It's love of people, it's love of society, it's love of human nature. And so it's not the quest for truth of philosophers, it's not truth as some abstraction, it's truth about human nature that you embrace fully and completely.
Just following what the professor said, I'm trying to sort of remember the exact phrase of Václav Havel when he said it's strategy of a modern man is not that he knows less about meaning of life, but he bothers less and less about this knowledge. I think this is a problem. Again, this device creates an illusion that we can reach any information, and actually we can learn. You know, with a slide of our finger, you know, we can learn more than Winston Churchill, Andrei Sakharov, and Václav Havel, you know, could learn for their entire life. But it doesn't bring wisdom. To the contrary, sometimes, you know, it creates some wrong feelings because we feel, you know, empowered. But this is not the real power. So Eric Schmidt from Google, you know, I think he bragged once, just repeated many times in different publications, that over probably a day to, you know, or now in 2016, so we provide more information, you know, create more information than the entire human race, you know, for the entire history. But so what? You know, one Instagram picture from your lunch, you know, contains more megabytes than the combined words of Plato and Shakespeare. Again, somehow we live in a world of illusions, and that's why it's it's important for us to remember the people like Václav Havel who, you know, who actually reach this wisdom not only by reading and actually writing books, but also, you know, projecting it to life. So the knowledge that we are accumulating, you know, should be part of our action. And again, action means that we're willing to take risk. And action means that we're willing to accept failure. And that's one of the biggest challenges of modern education that we're facing in the free world. We're teaching kids that failure is nothing but failure, which is wrong. You can fail, so you succeed next time. So, but because trying to protect our kids from failure, we build a generation that is not willing to take risk, not willing to make sacrifices. And I'm not, just following what the professor said, I'm not against, you know, individual excellence. But it's very important to remember that, you know, if you fail, you know, someone else can succeed. We are part of the same human race. 99% of explorers, if not probably more, in the 15th, 16th, and 17th centuries failed to reach the shores of Asia or America. But those who did, you know, they helped us to build a new world. So we have, today, by the way, the risk is not as bad. So we're definitely, you know, operating in a much safer environment. But we have to just teach our kids, we have to teach, you know, new generation that, you know, learning, it's a first, you know, step for action. And action could always, you know, include risk of failing. But if you feel that you're part of this, you know, the global environment, so you'll be always on the winning side. Thank you.
My father used to say that dictatorships don't have political colors, and human rights don't have political colors either. And I'm glad that the axis of that dichotomy is not anymore left and right, or is not so anymore left and right, because there are good folks in all the points of the spectrum, at least around the middle of the spectrum. And my remarks is just to reinforce the point that this evil that have been raised here and that is working very hard to succeed right now is also very well coordinated. It's very well coordinated in the world. And us, the Democrats, those that care not just about politics, but also about how to live our lives and how to be happy in this world, we are not so coordinated. So the reflection should be just learn and think how to work together to protect, in some cases to save, and in order to preserve the conquers and the environment that make us easy, that way of life that we want to be and that we want to have. Thank you.
I think that we could hardly imagine better end of our panel discussion. We opened the floor, and I think that this is time to invite you to continue in face-to-face exchange. Let me join you in thanking all our three panelists, Professor Zimbardo, Garry Kasparov, and Rosa Payá, for taking part in this endeavor of sharing with you their time and their experience. Thank you very much.